Hello, friends. Welcome to another episode of the Second Age Show podcast. My name is Strider, and as usual, I have my friends with me. Lakitia, hello.
Hey everybody, great to be back.
Great to be again here with you. Kyle, hello.
Hey, great to be here. Happy to see everyone.
And with us, we have a special guest tonight. It's James from Digital Talking. Hello, sir. How are you?
Hello, wonderful to be here.
Wonderful to have you here. Do you want to maybe tell our viewers something about what you do?
Absolutely. So my background is both as a software developer and as a linguist. And so one of the things that I do is use computers to work with scholars to better understand texts, mostly historical language texts, ancient texts, medieval texts. But for the last 4 years, I've been applying those same ideas to the study of the texts of Tolkien. And so the Digital Tolkien project is really about taking a scholarly, computational, linguistic point of view to the texts of Tolkien, treating them with the sort of awe and respect that many of us feel is appropriate.
Yeah, I'm a
Amazing.
big fan
Thank
of
you for that.
the search Tolkien function on your site. It's incredible. Well done.
Excellent. Thank you. More coming on that too.
Right on. Glad to hear that.
I just have to say it's amazing how many perspectives you can find in what are novels or books or however you want to call them, and then on how many levels one can approach them. This is something really unique, and like 15 years ago maybe it wouldn't be possible, but now we have this amazing tool, so that's amazing.
Yeah, indeed. As a historian, I appreciate that so much. So yeah, keep up the good work.
We'll put the necessary links in the description so everybody can check it out if they haven't already. And with that, maybe we can start. Lakitia, do you want to open the episode?
Absolutely. All right, so our first exclusive is Celebrimbor's story arc and involvement won't begin properly until around episode 4 and onwards. So that's halfway through the season. So I just want to add a little something to that. So I think this doesn't mean that he won't be involved prior to that at all. But it could as well be. So on to you guys. What do you think about this?
James, do you have any interesting ideas?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it makes a lot of sense, particularly in light of how little we know about him from just the Lord of the Rings books and appendices. The first that we hear about him sort of chronologically is that he is the Lord of Eregion. We don't know any of the backstory or anything. So in the context of what's talked about him in the Lord of the Rings books and where we're wanting to go in this story in the Rings of Power, I think it makes sense that we first of all need to establish other players, what's going on in terms of different regions of Middle Earth, and then Celebrimbor sort of emerges as one of the players in the region of Eregion.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think shows often introduce big players later on. Sometimes after a few episodes, sometimes even a few seasons in. So I don't think that's a particularly big surprise. I think it might be the case that he will be introduced for the first time in one of the later episodes, but I don't think that's the case. I think it's more likely he'll just be more in the background to other big players like Galadriel or Elrond. And I would absolutely certainly prefer to see him as a main character from the very get-go. So I would like this story to be his story mostly, but from early marketing we know that's not going to happen. And I remember us even speculating whether he was the person in that Tyrion pick that we got almost a year ago now, and we were speculating whether we'd be getting his backstory in Valinor. But it doesn't seem that he will be that much in the forefront. But I really don't think that's particularly unusual. So we had been speculating before that potentially we could be seeing Elrond, who is described as an architect in the marketing material, visit the dwarves in episode 1 or 2. And he potentially could be finding the perfect place to build Ostinethil later on. So I think there are several ways in which you can slowly bring him in to become the more prominent player in this story. And I certainly don't believe this means anything particularly bad, but it does make me a little bit sad, yeah.
I mean,
Uh,
it'd be. Sorry, go on.
No, you can. I will jump in later.
I was just going to say it'll be interesting to see how much backstory we actually can get about him.
Yeah.
And his backstory is something that Tolkien changed his mind about a few times. You know,
Yeah.
exactly what his relationship was. You know, him being in Nargothrond, him being associated with Galadriel and Celeborn. None of that stuff is in the Lord of the Rings itself. So we may not get much of that sort of stuff. He may sort of just emerge as a particularly skilled craftsman in a region or something.
Yeah, I think that's kind of on the nose there. There's also the fact that, and we've talked about this a lot, but the fact that they've cast a relatively older actor for him. There's a reason for that, and it's probably that he's meant to have been around for a while, and he's an experienced craftsman. And it seems that we can infer that Eregion is not necessarily established yet at this point in the series, so that could be another reason as well.
Can I just add just a little something to that, and then I'll let you
Sorry,
take
Strider.
it away, Strider. Just a short one. I just want to say that apparently, according to the OneRing.net, they initially didn't cast an older actor. They cast Tom Budge, who was of a similar age to Morvith Clark, just a couple of years older than her. So maybe that was a later development, and they decided, I mean, his maturity, maybe they decided that was an actual plot point, but that's not necessarily the case. I just wanted to say that.
So I would say that, okay, I'll just comment on that first. It does feel like the Stuart Townsend and Viggo Mortensen situation a bit.
Yeah.
So who knows what's the background, what's the reason for that? But I have to say I'm quite happy with the casting. Of course, we'll see how it will look like on the screen, but I think it looks quite promising. However, what I wanted to say is that for me, while I do hope to, of course, to see as much of everyone as possible, definitely Celebrimbor, especially because we don't know that, like, everything we know about him, you can say in like 3 sentences. So there's so much to see and discover about him. However, I would say that it does make sense that his story wouldn't really start until towards the midpoint of the season, because this is a very new era for a casual fan. It could even be for some casual book fans, this could be a pretty new era to deal with. So it does make sense to perhaps first meet Galadriel and Elrond and Elendil, Gil-galad, as those characters who in one way or another are mentioned, referenced, or of course seen in the Lord of the Rings and in the Hobbit. So it's not surprising, and it does kind of make sense. So I also wouldn't necessarily think it's a bad thing. I think it's a pretty good move, just to get everybody hooked in, show us, give us all some grounding in this new world with the things that we are already known, and then expand on it.
Yes.
So yeah.
But I just have one tiny remark here. I think Celebrimbor is actually one of the characters a lot of people are mostly looking forward to, and not just book fans, but he was obviously a prominent character in the Shadow of War, Shadow of Mordor video games. Of course, his story in those games is quite a bit different from
It's
his
fan
story
fiction.
in the lore.
Yeah.
It's absolutely fan fiction, but it put
That's it.
the character at the forefront of many a fan's minds. So, despite the fact that Celebrimbor, as he appears in those games, is not going to be appearing in this show, he still is one of the most prominent characters for people going into this show, I would say. somebody
Yeah.
most people know about. I would say that more people know about him than Gil-galad, or maybe even. Okay, maybe I'm taking it too far, but maybe even Elendil. Yeah.
I will take this last remark personally. But okay.
Oh, how do I
Um,
always manage to insult somebody? I'm sorry.
I'm kidding. But I mean, okay, yeah, the games definitely made him known to a wider audience. But still, I think that a vast majority of the viewers will still be really casual viewers. So,
Yeah.
I mean, I definitely agree. I think he's for sure when if there was like a poll or something, I'm sure he would be in like top 5, 6 characters people would be looking out for the most.
You better be.
But still, I think, yeah, like Galadriel and Elrond are just so well known that you would. It makes sense that they would first establish them and then move on. But yeah, I definitely hope we will see him sooner rather than later.
Yeah. It makes me
And
wonder.
especially given
Go ahead. Sorry.
especially given the show is named Rings of Power,
Yeah.
and so is clearly that's sort of the centerpiece. Even though we're obviously going to get Numenor and everything like that, the Rings of Power and how they come about and what happens to them afterwards, is clearly going to be the sort of main plot of the series. And so, in light of that, Celebrimbor has to be
Yeah.
a substantial character. I think it would be very
Yeah.
odd if he wasn't.
Indeed.
Exactly. That's a great
And
point, yeah.
yeah, speaking of that, would you like to read us the second exclusive?
Sure. So the second exclusive, Celebrimbor and the dwarves will forge rings together at some point near the end of season 1.
That's the surprising one a bit.
It's a big one.
I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, yes and no, given the friendship that Celebrimbor and the elves of Eregion have with the dwarves of Khazad-dûm. But still, I wonder, and I guess we all do. Does this mean that that the dwarves will take an active part in forging the rings of power, or what Gandalf references to at some point? The lesser rings, perhaps, or maybe they will just participate in making the dwarven rings. There's just so many options in this one sentence. So what do you guys think?
I just want to actually point out something that you also mentioned, that yes, we do not know which rings we're talking about here. Me personally, my first thought was maybe this is just Celebrimbor and the master craftsmen of the dwarven race coming together and just doing some work together, learning from one another, playing off of each other. So I would be really surprised if this were the Rings of Power we'd be talking about. I think this may serve as Celebrimbor establishing a relationship with them and the Gwaith y Myrdain establishing a relationship with the dwarves. We haven't heard anything about Narvi so far, which I think everybody's finding a little bit worrisome.
Shout out to Warking.
Yeah, yeah. I think he's quite fond of the dwarves. I'm not sure.
I don't know who told you that.
But yeah,
You think?
I don't know. I read it somewhere. I don't know. But
Elven,
yeah,
Elven propaganda.
I think this might be this might just be what this is all about. Just having them establish a relationship through their mutual, proficiency in the art of, I don't know, what's that, craftsmanship.
Yeah. I mean, it's made clear in the appendices that, the friendship between the Eregion elves and the dwarves was the greatest friendship ever between the elves and the dwarves. And that was focused very much on crafting, right? We're told that Celebrimbor was so dwarf-like in his obsession with crafting. So I think there's a lot of reasons to tie those together, even if it's not the Rings of Power, right? There's no suggestion that these are the Rings of Power necessarily. And it's not as if... I can't imagine that Celebrimbor and the other elves of Eregion only started making rings when Sauron taught them, or Anatar taught them how to do so, right? They were presumably working on those kinds of skills already, and Anatar just kind of upped their game.
Yeah.
So I think it's a wonderful way of introducing the friendship and collaboration between the Eregian elves and the dwarves for sure.
I really hope that we'll actually get the opportunity to see the friendship develop here from the very start. So I kind of hope we won't just be introduced to these characters with an already established friendship, but given that in the especially in the film viewers' minds, like the film audience's minds, this relationship between the two races is very, very tense. So I think everybody would be a little bit confused if now we suddenly we're here in the second age and they have this magnificent friendship going on. I would like there to be a little bit of an introduction, or maybe just some segue into, ease the audiences into this whole friendship thing. So yeah.
Yeah, and I have to wonder if
Completely
this is
agree.
also a way for Celebrimbor to decide that this is the area that he wants to settle in and maybe establish his realm, right?
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I was about to say
that
perhaps
makes
it
sense.
starts, like with that Elrond and Durin sort of relationship, and
Yeah.
then like there's a lot of points here that can be perhaps connected. That's eventually like you Celebrimbor, Eregion, dwarves, Khazad-dûm, Elrond being the architect,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
and the building of the friendship. I definitely agree. It would be very cool if we could see this being built. If we could see the friendship being built, and then, of course, eventually, see the tragedy of it shutting down. Yeah. Does anyone have any perhaps further comments for this point?
I think we can go to the next one because it kind of ties into this one as well.
Indeed. Kyle?
Yes.
Do you want to do this?
Absolutely. So this will kind of give some more context to things that are going on. The next exclusive is, in one of the sound stages, there is a forging room set, which is part of the Dwarven mines, and the rings will be forged there. The previous rings we talked about. Separate sources described it as a rocky chamber. So this is in Khazad-dûm somewhere?
Yeah, so dwarves, forging, rocky chamber. Like, I think we have ticked all the boxes.
Yeah.
I'm very one of the things I'm looking forward to is seeing all the aesthetics of Linden, Eregion, and Khazad-dûm.
Yeah.
And of course, we've seen Khazad-dûm already, so it's one of the things I'm looking forward to, or like I'm interested and a bit maybe anxious about how those aesthetics will fit in with the movies. Whether they should or shouldn't, it's probably everyone's preference, but it's definitely a thing to wonder about. And how will the forging room, how will the room where the Rings of Power, whether it's this particular forging room or it's maybe something in Region, I always had problems in a way imagining how does a room that in which the Rings of Power are created, how does that such a room, such a chamber look like?
Yeah.
So yeah,
I agree.
This will be interesting to see.
I think in Peter Jackson's prologue, you see them in like a wooded area almost. I think, if I remember correctly, they're like in the woods somewhere forging these rings, and it's a weird scene for me. I totally agree with that. It's hard to picture where exactly that would be.
Isn't that like in the Return of the King when they're forging the sword?
Maybe that's what I'm thinking of. Yeah.
Because I think that in the prologue, I think it looks like a rocky chamber too.
I can't remember.
Yeah.
There is a scene where they're outdoor in the woods, and it also doesn't feel right to me.
I don't know. I love it. I think that scene looks gorgeous, and whenever I watch The Return of the King, I don't know, it stands out to me as some place where I would like my stuff to be forged. I want to mention something in this exclusive where. So we're talking about Forging of the Rings in a rocky chamber. This is something that we have previously mentioned. And back then we speculated, okay, so this is probably, the Rings of Power, which we then connected to, okay, so are the Rings of Power going to be forged in the two prologue episodes? I think it now we can't say for sure, obviously, but it does look like that might not be the case. So as we know, as the story is looking at the moment, the Rings of Power being forged in the first two episodes, I would say is highly unlikely. So I just wanted to go back to what we've said previously. That was a couple of months ago. And I think these new leaks kind of, I don't know, these leaks shed a little bit more light on what we discussed back then. So I think it looks
They ma-
possible.
They may not even be forged in the first season.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
If the rings
Yeah.
that are being talked about here are not the actual rings of power, but the sort of practice runs, the lesser rings, if that's at the end of season 1, which I think would be wonderful, right? Because that foreshadows the actual, like when we see those rings being forged, even if they're not the rings of power, there's that excitement of, oh wow, okay, this is
Yes.
we're getting there. And if that's at the end of season 1, I think that's wonderful, because I would hate to rush things. I would hate to, hit people in episode 1 with really the main event,
Yeah.
the forging of the rings. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. And I also think that if I had to guess, and we have been guessing for a while now, I think that the Rings of Power won't be forged until season 2, mid-season 2, with the One Ring possibly being forged by the end of the season 2. So, yeah.
I'll just
I
add to that really
absolutely
quickly
agree.
that this is a really good example of why, the leaks we're getting are cool, and it's cool to hear stuff, but
Yeah.
they're out of context, and there's a lot of stuff we're missing. So everything needs to be taken with a healthy grain of salt, and we'll get more context when we see the show.
Well, that's a really good point, because it would be so easy to assume, not even us, like the people watching the leaks, the leaked footage, or physically being there or whatever. It would be easy for them to make assumptions,
Yeah.
and say, oh, rings are being forged, they're the rings of power.
Yeah.
Well, not necessarily. All we know is that rings were being forged,
Exactly.
of some kind. Yeah.
Yeah. Just a tiny thing I wanted to add that you mentioned earlier. I would really, I agree that it would be really lovely to see this sort of symmetry, the lesser rings being forged sometime during season 1, and then the Rings of Power being forged in season 2. I think it could also serve to make it to help them show just how very, very special the Rings of Power are. I think through the whole process of forging, this is just me fantasizing right now, but I'd say that forging the lesser Rings of Power could be a much simpler affair, not as grandiose, not as many procedures involved. Whereas the Rings of Power would be this much more visual. I don't want to say magical affair, because I don't think there's gonna be tangible magic present, but still. I think they can really differentiate how these two scenes would look, and the audiences would instantly be able to tell, wow, something really special is going on now. Because if we compare that to the other rings being forged previously, this feels completely different. So that could help add to the feeling of just the magnificence of the whole event.
Totally agree.
I think that's actually a really, really good point,
Yeah.
right? That our appreciation of the significance is only possible if we're given enough context first. And I
Yeah.
think would actually be a wonderful way of. I know you're just saying what you'd like to see,
Yeah.
but yeah, I no, that sounds wonderful to me.
Yeah.
Still, like listening to what Lakita just wonderfully described. Still, I have to. I'm guess
gonna
I'm
go
kind
to
of
our head.
repeating myself, but but how will the forging of the rings look like?
Yeah.
Like, there's some, power is poured into them in some way, and like Lakita said, there won't be any magic, and I agree. It's hard to imagine like what kind of magical effects would there be, but then again, they have to show us, the will. Let's say the will is the measure, the unit of measure for power. How is it put into this, and then how do you also create worthy enough surroundings for that, because in the intro of the Fellowship, if I remember correctly, you basically see just like one, I guess, like a stone
Yeah.
thing where the rings are poured into. You don't actually see, I think, perhaps like an actual chamber.
Mm.
How does that look like?
Yeah.
It's such a hard time. It's like they also have to create Sauron who will have to be perfect, terrifying, but also beautiful, super charming, but very very scary. There are so many challenges for the production of this show and for the showrunners to figure out, and this is, I think, probably in top 3 trickiest things that they will have to do for this show. It's
Yeah.
kind of mind blowing to imagine how this will be put into reality.
Mm-hmm.
I would imagine, I mean, the movie magic, it it can achieve a lot with a slightly different lighting, just different slower photography, some visual effects, and really emotional, tense music. All that
Yeah, I was
can
going to say even the
attribute
music.
to,
Yeah.
yeah, the music. All that can attribute to a scene feeling much more substantial, much more important than another scene where everything is just, observed from like maybe a bit of a distance and more natural lighting and everything. So that's one way I could imagine them doing it. Also, the build up to it could be really interesting. Just showing the importance of this event through, I don't know, decades of hard work by Celebrimbor, and this is the culmination of his art. So yeah, I they have a lot of tools at their disposal. Which way they'll choose to go, that excites me a lot, and that makes me super curious. And I really hope it's gonna be, and I'm sure it will be. Like James pointed out, this show is titled "The Rings of Power," so I'm sure a lot of attention is gonna be around that. But
Yeah.
yeah.
You just reminded me that in the Lord of the Rings appendices, that the Rings of Power took 90 years to make.
Yeah.
It was not a simple, one day we're
Yeah.
going to make them, right? It was a long process.
Yeah.
And we want to see it as the culmination
Yeah.
of this skill development. That,
Yeah.
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 Yeah, I think that ties in well with what you, James, said earlier. That maybe we can see the less rings being forged, and at the end of season 1, and then, I'm guessing. I think it's probably quite a common guess that there will be certain time jumps, at least in between some of the seasons, if not during the seasons as well. So if season 1 ends with forging of the lesser rings, and then there's maybe a time jump, and then as the season 2 progresses, there's also some time progressing, not like 3 weeks or something, like maybe months perhaps, and we can see that build up, and then at the end of season 2 or at some point during season 2, it would feel way more earned. And I definitely am glad that all of this implies that they will, it's not just implies, it's clear that they will not be forced in the prologue, because why call the show The Rings of Power?
Yeah. Absolutely. Shall we move on to our last exclusive?
Yeah, so I'll take this one. Basically, the motivation behind the rings. So Celebrimbor is alerted about the threat and growing fear of Adar in the east and wants to be prepared. And as the result of the growing threat and his desire to be prepared, basically he will start working on the rings. So, what do we think about this?
This one
Kyle,
confuses
would
me
you-
the most.
Yeah.
Kyle, take it away.
Let's hear your thoughts about this.
I'll just say really quickly that I kind of hope this isn't what it sounds like it is. I don't want to see Adar replacing the growing threat of Sauron in the east, unless Adar is supposed to be meant to be like some kind of ally of Sauron or something, and that's what signals his rise. But I don't want to see Adar replace Sauron in that sense. And just to play the devil's advocate for a minute, I have to wonder, going back to one of the previous leaks we talked about, if Celebrimbor and the dwarves are actually forging or creating the doors of Durin rather than the rings, and that's what they're working on and that's what they're preparing for rather than, the rings themselves.
Yeah,
Okay.
this is an interesting one, because I think we need a motivation for why Celebrimbor is doing this. Why he's so keen to. Well, let me take a step back. There's no mention here of Anatar and teaching the skills, and that's going to be. I don't know how they're going to do. I do not know how they're going to do the Lord of Gifts idea. That's going to be one of the trickiest things to pull off, because obviously book readers will immediately know what's going on, and so they're going to have to be creative with that. I think I'm expecting maybe some changes, just 'cause otherwise it won't work. But we need some motivation. I don't love the suggestion of this exclusive that it's somehow Celebrimbor's just doing it because of some threat from outside. I'm hoping it's still that motivation of, I want to make amazing things, because it's clear in the appendices again that Celebrimbor's motivation was the same as Feanor's, right? Just this obsession with the craft, and an ego, and I'm sure it's going to relate to relations with Lyndon as well, of him wanting to show that he's just as Eregion's just as important as Lyndon. I want to see that stuff, not just there's a threat. I need to make some rings.
Yeah.
Yeah, same. We're not sure how exactly, like you say, Anatar is gonna fit in this equation, but one way I could see that happening is like you suggest. At the moment, I think most of us kind of believe that Sauron or Anatar is not gonna be appearing much in the first season, at least not as such, not as Anatar. We've heard very, very little, next to nothing, about his potential involvement during the filming, etc. So maybe what they're going with is having this serve as, why Celebrimbor ultimately chooses to take the help that Anatar offers. So Celebrimbor is already dabbling a little bit in the craft of ring making. Anatar knows that he can help him out quite a bit there, and in turn, they can learn from each other. But of course, Celebrimbor would probably be a little bit reluctant to agree to take the aid of a stranger. Therefore, Anatar creates this sort of threat, this sort of diversion that pushes Celebrimbor towards needing a lot of help, and therefore being much more open to the idea of somebody coming to help him out with this.
I was about to say. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I
thought
just
you
wanted to
were
say
there.
I'm not the biggest fan of all that at all. It seems a little, I don't know, contrived. Then again, this is just the roughest idea that I have, and I'm absolutely sure that the writers are capable of coming up with a compelling backstory to this whole situation. But it does make me wonder, and I just wanted to say that we mentioned in the exclusive the growing threat, fear of Adar. I think this could potentially also mean not Adar personally, but just his orcs.
Yeah, good point.
So not having him replace Sauron as the lead bad guy, but just his orcs presenting this huge threat.
Well, I wanted to say that, of course, what you all said definitely makes sense, and I agree with that. And the thing is, of course, as mentioned, we lack context for this. This is just like one sentence, and only one half of the sentence is basically, Adar. We don't know what is Sauron's plan, of course. So who knows? This may be just a part of some greater strategy that he has. So whatever we don't know what is his goal. At this point in time, does he start does Sauron at the moment the first episode starts has a plan? Okay, I want to forge some rings, I want to control is there a thing? Is it a thing, or is it, or does he have something else that he hears of Celebrimbor and what's happening in Eregion. And as a response to his master plan, that he maybe changes his plan to be like, okay, maybe I should look into these rings that are being made in Eregion. There's so much there to play with for the writers, and also I would say potential motivation for Celebrimbor could at least partially be the desire to maybe write, not write, but to maybe heal some wounds from the first age, because we know it will be referenced. Perhaps the wounds from the War of Wrath and everything that was happening with Morgoth in the Silmarillion, in the Silmarillion. That may also be one of the motivations, like, okay, let's give the rings to these races and help all work together, maybe do something. That can also be like one part of that.
Yeah, it's interesting in the Silmarillion, you get the impression that the ring making was Plan B.
Yeah.
Right, that it was because he was rejected by Gil-galad and Elrond that he then, like, his intention was, I want to get the elves on my side, right? And he goes to Gil-galad first, and Gil-galad's like, nah, I don't like this guy. And so his plan B is, okay, now I'm going to play on Celebrimbor's crafting obsession and make these rings. I do want to point out that even then, I don't think plan B was to give the rings to men and dwarves. I think that was plan C. That was plan C once he found out about the 3 elven rings, right? Because in the Silmarillion, the 16 rings that he knows about were all elven rings originally. They weren't, the giving them the 9 to men was kind of, okay, now that the elves of Eregion have found me out, I'm going to destroy Eregion and go to the easiest people to trick in the world, humans.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and that makes me wonder also, like, will we see an Anatar figure try to enter Lindon at all? Like, are we going to skip over all that and just go straight to Eregion? Like that poses an interesting issue there for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I hope we will. But then again, I could also understand why they would just avoid that, because if we have Gil-galad and Elrond turn him away, that will automatically make the audiences a little bit suspicious of him. And if they really want to present this as the central mystery of the show, or at least the first season or the first 2 seasons, who is this person, then of course they would want to avoid that, I think.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a really good point. And it would make sense from like a show making perspective to actually avoid that. That's a really good point. I didn't think of that.
The only way I can see them avoiding the problem of revealing Anatar too soon is if there are multiple candidates.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
I
So
think that's the case.
we know there's going to be somebody, but if they set it up so there's 3 or 4 possibilities, then even book readers will know, I don't know which one it is.
Yeah.
I think from what we know so far, from the official marketing and stuff, I would say we at the moment, I have at least 2 candidates who they could potentially be building up to be a candidate for Sauron, which is the so-called Meteor Man trademark, and also Halbrand. So both of these characters are presented as mysterious characters. We don't know much about their motivation. They're going to be interacting with some of the other main characters. My personal opinion is that neither of them is Anatar. But I think they might be going with that central mystery throughout the first season. Yeah,
I think so too.
I think if they set that up where we don't know who Meteor Man is, we don't know who Halbrand is, and we don't know who Adar is, and where he fits in, then I think we're nicely set up for a twist, even for book readers.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, exactly.
I think they're visually setting up Adar for casual audiences, probably to be, oh, that's Sauron kind of thing. So that's definitely a red herring. And we've discussed the possibility before that it's, like you said, like it's none of the current cast, and we'll see something completely new come into the picture.
Yeah, and I think that we know that Galadriel will apparently be hunting down the remnants of Morgoth's forces, etc. So I think they could present from the from the get-go that she still believes Sauron is around or something similar. So we have the audiences be aware of that very early on. So maybe that's why they would be presenting several candidates. So we can be really hyped up from the very beginning to try and figure out which one of these is the actual Anatar.
Yeah, I mean, it's great storytelling to have Galadriel going off seeking, because there's that wonderful line in the Council of Elrond where Elrond says that, you know, we all thought at the end of the first stage that evil was over, and it was not so.
It was not so. Yeah.
That's the setup for this, right?
Yeah.
Galadriel's got doubts, but I love this idea that she's off trying to find proof. Meanwhile, Sauron's amongst them, right?
Yeah.
This idea that she's off
Yeah.
trying to find signs, and it's actually somebody, you know, it's coming from
Yeah.
inside the house.
Yeah.
Kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that is excellent. And you know, Sauron the Deceiver.
I was just gonna say the exact same thing.
It's who he is, and honestly, I wish, I hope that he will be successfully hidden in plain sight. That would be amazing for for all of us who know, Anatar. He goes there, then he goes there, does this, and it's actually Sauron and all that. To have us look at him for like 5-6 episodes, and then at the end, at the 7th episode, oh my god, that's him, and then that would be such an amazing reveal. That would just be perfect for all of us to surprise us as people who have read the books and who know it. That would be one of the coolest tricks they can definitely put. And I think there's a cat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Arda wants to have her cameos.
She's crawling all over the place here. She's getting restless.
That was like a split second.
Yeah.
Like blink and you miss it.
I think that might be a really fun way to do it, especially if they manage to convince the audiences it's, I don't know, I'll just, it's Meteor Man, that's Sauron, that's who he is. And everybody's like, ooh, this is so exciting, now it's going to be the big reveal. And then all of a sudden you have a shot of Halbrand climbing towards Eregion and being, hi, I'm the Lord of Gifts. And everybody's like,
oh, snap. Yeah.
so yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, something like that.
I just hope that what I do hope that they avoid doing is having us speculate among several candidates and everybody having their own favorite for Sauron, etc. And in the end, just that being somebody completely different.
Yeah.
Them bring somebody new for the very last shot and being, ta-da, it's me.
Yeah.
I hope they don't do that because that's kind of cheesy.
Like,
It's nice if you can go back and see. And it'd be wonderful if you can go back to episode 1 and go, they told us back then and we didn't know.
Right.
Exactly. Not as Lakita said, like, so not have us like all the clues for these 5 guys and then just a random 6th guy appears in the other. Like, let's not do that. But as Jen said, like, if we can go back and be like, oh my god, that he was.
It's classic.
That would be gold.
It's classic murder mystery telling, right? You don't want a situation where you set up 5 suspects and all of a sudden it turns out to be the 6th person that you never knew about.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah, I agree.
There's no payoff really
I
there,
think
right?
that's
exactly.
That's why that's one of the reasons why the ending of Game of Thrones was not particularly satisfying. No
Right.
spoilers here, but I think that's why.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Okay.
Cool.
Is this it?
This is it.
Is this all you can?
Yeah, nice.
Is this all we can conjure?
Yeah.
Well, I'll just have to respond to the Game of Thrones bit. I just have to say, I think the ending could have been great if we had like 3 more seasons of leading up to it. But it definitely left us wanting for so much more. It wasn't earned.
Yeah.
It could have been, but it wasn't. So hopefully, the people behind the Rings of Power will learn from that.
Agreed.
And I think that is the case from what we heard about the showrunners. I think there's a passion to see this through to the best of their possibilities. Now we will see, of course, if that will be
If they can pull it off. Yep.
Yeah.
if they actually do it. But I think it's at least clear that there is an actual genuine desire on their part to do this. We'll see the results.
And I think it helps that there's an ending. Like there's a solid ending that they can run with.
Yeah.
So
Indeed. Okay. Any final thoughts about any of the things mentioned today? Except that
just wanna say this was a really
Kyle's cat
fun-
is awesome. Okay.
Yeah, at least something that's awesome on that side of things.
oh wow.
Yeah,
Here
to
we
end
go.
as
Here we go.
Very much so. I just wanted to say this was a really, really fun one.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for joining
Yeah.
us, James. It was an absolute
Oh, my
blast
pleasure.
to
It was
have
a ton of fun for me too.
It was really, really fun. Excellent
And it's
points on all
always-
sides.
It's always fun to chat about Celebrimbor, so I think Tolkien too would agree if he were here.
Mhm.
So yeah.
And there's also dwarves, which is always, a good thing.
Yep.
So, a great combination.
Yes.
Indeed.
Okay. Well, thank you everyone for tuning in. Good evening to you. Good morning. Good day, whenever you may be watching this. Thanks to James for joining us, and see you all next time. Bye
See you
bye.
next time.